Is. Hey, if you got your Bibles, let's turn to Judges chapter 9. Judges chapter 9. Um, Typing everything out this week, and I'm like, we're going to have to do like 20 minutes of recap just to bring us back up to speed. It's been a while. We've had VBS and activities and stuff going on. It's been good, but it's been a little bit since we've been in Judges. So while you're finding Judges chapter 9, just kind of pull you back in. The last couple of chapters talked about Gideon. And what we know about Gideon, he's the one that threw out the fleece, actually did it twice to see if it was God that was telling him what it was that he was hearing. He wanted to be sure. And God showed great patience, long suffering with Gideon, and had no issues with all of his requests, and just continued to show him that he was the Lord. And so Gideon walked through all of that. Then chapter 8, you find that Gideon, as they go into battle, and then Gideon captures the last couple of kings there. And unfortunately, Gideon, fortunately and unfortunately, fortunately, he did not take kingship that the people wanted to give him. And that's going to lead us into chapter 9. But over in, I think it was verse 23, he told him, I will not rule over you, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. So Gideon took the stance that he was supposed to and said, hey, God's going to be our guide. We are going to follow God. He knew where he was supposed to be. But then we see him very shortly take the spoils of the war, and he makes a golden ephod, and he sets it up in the city, and it becomes an idol, a place of worship for the people, or something that they idolize because of those victories. And so you just really see the hearts of the Israelite people. And it's a blanket statement because we don't know individuals there. But for the majority of it, you see their hearts are just not where they're supposed to be. And they are striving after the things of the world. And even after God shows up time and time and time again, they're still just, they're really desiring more than what they're getting from God. And so you just kind of see that struggle. And honestly, it's not a far-fetched thing for us to see today. We've got people that have a relationship with the Lord that are still striving for the world and just missing that mark and stuff. And so for us, we want to make sure that we're not those folks, that we find our satisfaction in God and what it is that He provides for us. Even when we may not feel like it's what we want, it is what we need, and He takes care of us. And so the Israelite people were not in that place. They did enjoy 40 years of peace after defeating their enemy there. And so they did get to enjoy some peace there at the end of chapter 8. And that leads us into Judges chapter 9. Now, chapter 9, it reads a little differently than the rest of Judges does. This is Abimelech's story. Abimelech is one of the 72 sons, I think, that Gideon had. And so Abimelech is the son of the maidservant of Gideon there. And so, or of Jerubbaal, my bad there on that. So it is Gideon, Jerubbaal, those names, remember, those are interchangeable. But in this chapter, it uses Jerubbaal as Gideon's name. So Abimelech is one of his sons. And so this kind of walks through his conspiracy that he concocts to take over as king, and so it is it reads a little differently. It's not the set of, hey, the people cry out and then God delivers a deliverer to them and raises up that judge, and he defeats the enemy and they live at peace until that judge dies, and then they repeat that cycle. This one's a little bit differently, but it's still an important part of where Israel is at, and it shows a picture of their heart and how they're trying to grasp things that are around them. So Judges chapter 9, we're going to start in verse 1. We're going to read some chunks of the verses as we go through because it's a little bit of a longer chapter with 57 verses. So we're going to try and see what we can do to get through it. Judges chapter 9, starting in verse 1, it says, "And Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal," that's Gideon, went to Shechem to his mother's relatives and spoke to them and to the whole clan of the household of his mother's father, saying, "Speak now in the hearing of all the leaders of Shechem, which is better for you, that 70 men, all the sons of Jerubbaal, rule over you, or that one man rule over you? Also remember that I am your bone and your flesh." So he starts off in this part and he's appealing to them and says, what would be better? Would it be better for having to have all 70 of Gideon's sons to rule over you, or would it be better to have one? And don't forget that one, I am your relative. Yes, sir.
Is 70, is that 60?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Score is 20. Yeah. Yeah. So yes, a score is 20 if I remember. I had to go back to history class to remember what a score was. But yes, so he appeals to him and he says, "Hey, would it be better to be ruled by 70 people or one that's your relative?" He really plays into that. He's there standing in front of the household of his mother's father. So he is pulling at their, "Hey, you know me. I'm part of you. I am one of you. I'm your flesh and your blood. Wouldn't it be better if I was to rule over you?" What we don't find in any of this is the other 70 saying, "Hey, we're going to rule over you." Because Gideon left this as, "Hey, I'm not ruling over you, and my sons aren't going to rule over you. We're going to follow God." There's not a point that I saw in any of my reading that said the 70 are now saying, "Hey, you know what? Since Dad's gone, we're going to take this over." So Abimelech just walks in and says, "Hey, is it better for them to rule over you?" And they're not asking to. He doesn't give them that point. They're not asking to rule over, or would it be better to be ruled by one? And have your own king, because they tried to make Gideon king. So he's playing into the things that they already desired as a nation or as a people in this area, but he's doing it where his mom is from to appeal to them and really just kind of playing on those heartstrings for them. And so he closes verse 2. It says, "Remember that I am your bone and your flesh." And verse 3 says, "And his mother's relatives spoke all these words on his behalf in the hearing of all the leaders of Shechem." And so he's got the relatives to go and share this with the leaders there that are in Shechem. And it says, "And they were inclined to follow Abimelech. And they said, he is our relative." They didn't give any other reason why they would follow him except for the fact that he's kin to us. I don't know about y'all, but sometimes that's the reason I don't do it, is because they're kin to us, right? And that's one of those you're like, I'm not going to take that position because that's my family. I'm not doing that. Me and my dad's had that conversation in the past when I was early on in student ministry and stuff. He was serving at a church and he had an opening, and he never really asked me to apply for the position, but we had that conversation once, and I was like, "Dad, I don't know that I could work for you." I'm just being honest, Dad. I don't know that I could. And it's one of those that here, that is their sole purpose in following Abimelech, is they said, he's our relative. So why would we not choose him? Nobody was making them make a choice at this point in time, but they felt like they needed to. And the one that showed up was their relative. And they're like, "Well, we got to do it now. This is our relative, so we'll follow Abimelech." And so they gave him 70 pieces of silver from the house of Baal-berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless fellows, and they followed him. Then he went to his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men on one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, for he hid himself. All the men of Shechem and all Beth Millo assembled together, and they went and made Abimelech king by the oak of the pillar, which was in Shechem. So he goes and he appeals to the people, or he gets his relatives to appeal to the leaders of Shechem, and they say, hey, yeah, we'll follow him because he's our relative. And they give him 70 pieces of silver from the temple's treasury, I'm assuming is what it is. But that's where this money came from, was the temple that's there in Shechem. And so they give him 70 pieces of silver. He goes out and hires a bunch of guys that will go with him to kill his brothers. Great start, yeah. He killed all of them except for the one, which is Jotham, who hid himself, the youngest son, Jotham there in verse 5. He killed all the rest of his brothers. Every one of them. They're now gone, and they slew them all. And I don't know if it was a sacrifice or not, but he says on one stone. I don't think this is David-like where he's slinging a rock with a slingshot, but I think it is sacrificing his brothers in this one area. And so he slaughtered them with the guys that he brought, because he wasn't going to be able to do it himself. 1 against 70. I don't really care how big you are. It happens in Scripture. When God's on their side, he allows Samson to do it and some other folks. But for the most part, he told Gideon he could have done that. But unless God's on your side, one man's not taking on 70. And so he went and hired a bunch of folks that would do whatever it is he wanted them to do. And so he went and he slays his brothers, and the people are now following him. They assemble together. They make Abimelech king by the oak of the pillar, which was in Shechem. And so the only brother to survive was Jotham, because he hid. And he's going to be important to the story, because he's going to pronounce the curse that ends all of Abimelech's reign here. So that's where we find ourselves here in Abimelech's start to his kingship. He is now king. And so verse 7, we jump into it, and it says, now when they had told Jotham, he went and stood on the top of Mount Gerizim. That one should sound familiar, because that one was in earlier accounts of the Old Testament. There's blessings and cursings from Mount Gerizim and I think Mount Ebal. They were side by side, and so they pronounced blessings and cursings from this mountain early on in the days of Joshua, and possibly even in the days of Moses there. But Jotham, when he found out about it, he went and stood on the Mount Gerizim and lifted his voice and called out, and he said, thus he said to them, listen to me, O men of Shechem, that God may listen to you. So he appeals to the same men who have just made Abimelech king. And so he is appealing to these guys of Shechem. And it said, once the trees went forth to anoint a king over them, and they said to the olive tree, reign over us. But the olive tree said to them, shall I leave my fatness with which God and men are honored, and go to wave over the trees? Then the trees said to the fig tree, you come, reign over us. But the fig tree said to them, shall I leave my sweetness and my good fruit, and go to wave over the trees? Then the trees said to the vine, you come, reign over us. But the vine said to them, shall I leave my new wine, which cheers God and men, and go to wave over the trees? Finally, all the trees said to the bramble, you come, reign over us. The bramble said to the trees, if in truth you are anointing me as king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, may fire come out from the bramble and consume the cedars of Lebanon. And I'm going to stop right there. So what's happening here is Jotham, when he hears about all this, he goes to Mount Gerizim. You can find that. It's in Deuteronomy 27 is where this one is mentioned a time before in the time of Moses. And he pronounces this curse through the telling of a fable. A fable is just a story about animals or plants that teaches a moral lesson. And so he tells them this fable about all of these trees. And if you're looking at these various trees are trying to find a king. They desire a king so much that they're just walking through the list of like, hey, what about this one? No, you won't do it. Okay, well, what about this one? And they're just going all the way through this, just trying to find someone who would reign over them. Each of the first three trees were reluctant to give up their profitable activity that they were doing for something that didn't really matter. The kingship was not gaining them anything in this fable here. And so the fourth and the final candidate, which was the bramble, had no useful function. Honestly, it was just really seen as a nuisance for farmers. So it is not the one that you would look and go, hey, we're going to make you the king of all the trees, the bramble. No, it had no value. It was much more of a nuisance in that day. But the plant accepted their offer of kingship. And if you look at the wording there, the bramble said, if in truth you are anointing me as king, there in verse 15, over you, if you are going to make me king, then yes, you can come and find shade with me. Come and find refuge in my shade. But the thing about bramble, it was a low spreading weed that really didn't provide shade. And so it had no value being the king over all of these trees. And Jotham is using this story just to kind of to show that they're grasping at anything to be king right now. They're so desiring to follow a person as their leader that they're missing that they were commanded to follow God. And so Jotham is showing them through this story that is it. And it says, even in the last part of there, if the trees didn't submit to the bramble, he issued a threat that fiery judgment would come from him and would consume the cedars of Lebanon, which were the grandest of trees in that time. And so he said that, hey, the fires are going to consume everything. So not only did the bramble say, hey, yeah, I'll be king, but if you don't follow me, you don't do what I say, here's the cursing that's going to happen. And so Jotham uses this story to kind of relay what's going on to the people of Shechem. And he continues on there in verse 16 and kind of gives the interpretation. I wanted us to break down the story, but Jotham now gives his interpretation here, starting in verse 16 through 21. It says, now, therefore, if you have dealt in truth and integrity in making Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have dealt with him as he deserved, for my father fought for you and risked his life and delivered you from the hand of Midian, but you have risen against my father's house today and have killed his sons, 70 men, on one stone, and have made Abimelech, the son of his maidservant, king over the men of Shechem, because he is your relative. It says, if then you have dealt in truth and integrity with Jerubbaal and his house this day, rejoice in Abimelech, and let him also rejoice in you. See, the thing about it is, Jotham already knew how they were dealt with, because he had hidden. The only reason that Jotham didn't suffer the same fate as all the rest of his brothers is because he was hiding in that moment, kind of like his father did, hiding in the wine press, threshing wheat. And so he was hiding, so he saved his own life. He knew the answers to this. To me, I'm reading through this, and it's almost an opportunity for them to reflect on, how do we put this person in power? How did we allow Abimelech to become king? And he hits the nail on the head, and he said, you did it because he was your relative in verse 18. But he's looking and going, if you did it the right way, if you did this through truth, if you did this through honor, if you did this by respecting the family that you wanted to be king, you begged my father to become king of you, and he said, no, we're going to follow God. And so if you still treated the family with respect, he said, then celebrate it. Then if you did everything the right way, then find joy in it. Rejoice in Abimelech as your king, and let him rejoice in you as the king over you as his people. If everything was done the right way, then let it be so. So he started with that to kind of paint the picture of, I know that's not the way it happened, but if it was, then this is how you should feel about it. But if not, verse 20, that's what it starts with. But if not, let fire come out from Abimelech and consume the men of Shechem and Beth Millo, and let fire come out from the men of Shechem and from Beth Millo and consume Abimelech. It's that curse that he had told in his fable. It says, then Jotham escaped and fled and went to Beer and remained there because of Abimelech, his brother. And so he said, if you did it the right way, then praise the Lord. Find joy in this, what God has led you to. Find joy in honoring that family. He's not worried about them setting up a king, although they weren't supposed to have a king. They didn't need a king. But he did say, if you didn't do it the right way, here's the curse that's going to happen. Fire is going to come from Abimelech, and he's going to destroy the people of Shechem. And in turn, the people of Shechem are going to turn around and destroy Abimelech. He doesn't just stop with the bramble consuming the cedars of Lebanon. No, he says, and it's going to go in the same way in reverse as well. There's going to be a curse on both sides here. And so Jotham interprets his fable with almost some sarcasm, but getting them to think about how they put him in that place. How they gave him that position and said, hey, here's the curse that's going to happen for the people and for Abimelech. And then he went and hid in a place that is, Be'er is the same word as well. So we don't know if he went and hid in a well or what, but we just know that he fled and he hid because his life was still in danger, because he was one of the sons that they didn't kill. And he just pronounced a curse on all the people and their new king, which is not a great idea, because Exodus 22:28 says, you shall not curse God nor curse a ruler of your people. So Jotham is going to be okay. That verse is going to come into play here with Gael. Jotham is actually speaking on behalf of God. And the reason we know that is because God is going to make everything that Jotham said come to fruition in the next 30 verses. So everything that he pronounced is going to happen by the time we get to verse 57 of Judges chapter 9. So we know that because that is the truth, that God was speaking through Jotham with this curse. So he is not speaking against God, and he's not speaking against a king that God set up. So Jotham will not be destroyed, but there is another one that will come, and where Exodus 22, that promise is going to play into Gael that we find here in just a little bit. Let's continue on as we see the fighting begin. So Jotham just pronounced this curse, and we get into 3 years into Abimelech's reign. Verse 22 says, now Abimelech ruled over Israel for 3 years. Not a very long stint. 3 years goes by. I mean, we're already halfway through 2024. We know that time flies, whether you're having fun or not. It's going by anyways. And so he's ruled over Israel for 3 years. And verse 23 says, then God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the men of Shechem, and the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, so that the violence done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might come, and their blood might be laid on Abimelech, their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who strengthened his hands to kill his brothers. Then the men of Shechem, in verse 25, set men in ambush against him on the tops of the mountains, and they robbed all who might pass by them along the road. And it was told to Abimelech. So Abimelech's been reigning for, his reign's going to last for 3 years. The fighting is now about to start. God sent an evil spirit. And in just reading through that, you're looking and going, okay, help me understand why God would send a demon to do this. And really what it is it's not necessarily a demonic force that God sent. Commentators agree on the fact that God was not using evil to bring about good, because that's not in God's nature. So this is not a contradiction in here, but really what it is that evil spirit doesn't necessarily mean a demonic spirit, but that God had replaced the harmony between the people and Abimelech with the spirit of distrust and disagreement. God didn't put Abimelech in charge. He did not pronounce him as king. He was not supposed to take kingship. Gideon had said, me and my sons will not do this. Abimelech chose to do this on his own, and the people were following for a little while. And then God put a division amongst them because they weren't supposed to be united in this way anyways. And so there's a distrust, there's disagreements that start to come because they're not in God's will. We know as God's people that anytime we get outside of God's will, it starts to affect the relationships around us. They're not in God's will, and so God is not protecting them as He can. He's not providing that unity that only comes through the Spirit. And so there's a disunity, there's disagreements that are starting to happen, so much so that the people of Shechem said, hey, you know what? We're going to make life miserable for Abimelech. We're going to start hiding along the pathway, and we're just going to start torturing the people that come through and giving him fits with all of this. So they're breaking Abimelech's trust by ambushing the people as they're traveling through Abimelech's area, which is not good for him, because if people can't travel through his area, they're not trading in his area. They're going to avoid that, and you get the wrong person, and now you got a fight on your hands because you've hurt somebody from another nation. They're going to come and attack. And so the people of Shechem are looking and going, hey, we're going to make his life miserable. So we're starting to hide out in the bushes. We're ambushing people. And so that's what has started now here in year 3 of Abimelech's reign, or somewhere around that time frame. And God has allowed this to happen because they're not in the will of God at this time. So verse 26 continues on. It says, now Gaal the son of Ebed came with his relatives, most believe that's his brothers, and crossed over into Shechem, and the men of Shechem put their trust in him. I'm going to read the rest of the story, and we'll come back and talk about all the funny parts in this. It says, they went out into the field and gathered the grapes of their vineyards and trod them, and they held a festival, and they went into the house of their God and ate and drank and cursed Abimelech. That's the part that comes into trouble, because it is a king, it is a ruler, and they're cursing their own king that they set up. But verse 28 says, then Gaal the son of Ebed said, who is Abimelech, and who is Shechem that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal, and is Zebul not his lieutenant? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem, but why should we serve him? Would, therefore, that this people were under my authority, then I would remove Abimelech. And he said to Abimelech, increase your army and come out. The irony in all of this. Gaal, the son of Ebed, and his brothers walk into Shechem. They're traveling. They go down the road. For some reason, they're not ambushed like all the other ones. They found favor with the guys of Shechem. There's some commentators that tell you there's a possibility that they knew him. There may have been some relation there. But for some reason, Gaal and his brothers did not get attacked like the other travelers did. And so they're out there and they throw a party. They're like, hey, okay, they strike up conversation. They're enjoying one another's company. And he says, hey, okay, all the people go out into the field. They gather some grapes. They mash those grapes, and they held a party out in the field. And they drank too much. They had too much of a good time here in this. And they're eating, they're drinking. And the people start to curse Abimelech, which doesn't reflect well, because they're the ones that set Abimelech as their king. They're the ones that said, hey, we want you to rule over us because you're our relative. And now they're looking and going, you know what, we really don't like this guy. That division has now grown to the place where they're cursing their king, and they're doing that in the presence of someone who they probably don't know very well. They may be somewhat familiar with him, but they've already placed their trust in him, that we found back in 26, because their behavior was very quick to do that. They placed their trust in Abimelech because he was their relative. They're just like, hey, you know what? you can walk and breathe at the same time, so we're just going to let you be king. Now this other guy comes along when they're not satisfied with their king, and this guy comes into the picture with his brothers, and they throw their trust into him. And now it's gotten to the point where this enemy is giving them ideas of like, who is Abimelech? Who is this king? Why should y'all even listen to him? He said, if I ruled over y'all, you wouldn't have to worry about him. If I had the authority, he said, we'd remove Abimelech and we wouldn't worry about him. He's nothing. You know who, it's just Abimelech. That's the son of Jerubbaal, and then his lieutenant is Zebul. And I mean, there's nothing important about them. So if you were under my authority, I'd remove Abimelech. As a matter of fact, once you go tell Abimelech, at the end of verse 29, it says, increase your army and come out. He sent word to him and said, hey, why don't you come fight us? In the midst of all that's going on, Gale starts throwing out these, he gives this speech, and he's going to be reminded of this speech later on by somebody that's present during this time. He gives this speech in the midst of his drunkenness and says, who is this guy? I could fight him. We could take him. We'd remove him if I had the authority. If y'all gave me the authority to do that, I could remove this guy. And he's just spouting off. He's just saying a bunch of words in the midst of all of this. And he says, why don't you just go tell him to increase his army and come on out? He said, yeah, we'll fight him. Tell him to get his army ready and come on. I got this. We can take care of him. Just as easily as they were persuaded by Abimelech to make him king, they are persuaded by Gale that he could lead them better, and they rally behind him to try and overthrow Abimelech. The people are just grasping on anything that feels comfortable, anything that feels like what they are desiring, but the reality of all of it is they're grasping at things of the world and putting their trust in that, when God has shown them time and time again that if you'll just follow me, everything will be okay. It may not be perfect, it may not be easy, but it's going to be worth it in the end. And unfortunately, we have folks in today's world that are simply grasping at anything that they can to fulfill their desires, or what they think that they desire, or what somebody else is telling them that they desire. And they're grasping at those things when the only thing that satisfies, and this is what God's children should be telling people, the only thing that satisfies, the only thing that can fill that void is God himself. I'm not going to ask you to admit to anything, but I guarantee you that the majority of us in this room have tried to satisfy that desire with the wrong thing at some point in time in our life. I know I have. I know that I have tried to chase the things of the world and say, you know what, I can fill that void myself. I can fix this problem. I can take care of this. But at the end of it all, nothing satisfies like Jesus, because nothing can satisfy like Jesus does. And we live in a world, none of it worked. It always caused problems. It hurt other people. It hurt me. It hurt relationships that I had. None of that works. But we live in a world that is just like the people of Shechem were here. They're desiring things, and they don't fully know everything that they're desiring, and they don't know exactly what it is that's going to fill that void. And unfortunately, they've got 1,000 different voices telling them, hey, this is what you need. You need to identify this way. You need to do these things. You need to try this thing. You need to do all of these things. And in the midst of those voices, they've got Christian folks that are saying, really, you just need Jesus. But in the chaos of all of that and the thousand voices that they have with social media and the national media and everything else that's around them, what the students are hearing in schools, what our children are hearing in their classes, what they're seeing, what our teachers are having to teach through government schools and different things there, they're getting lost in all of this. And we get a week with them at VBS to tell them what they really need. We get a couple hours every week, and some of you are trying your best to teach them at home, hey, this is really what you need, and they're confused about what it is that can satisfy. Just like the people of Shechem are, they're confused about the things that they need to fill those desires that they think that they have. Unfortunately, the stories never change. This was written how many thousands of years ago? I don't know the timeline of when the book of Judges was written. I know it was written before the New Testament. That's almost 2,000 years old now. So we're looking at thousands of years ago. Stories are written about people that are doing their best to satisfy the desires that they have in their life. It's the same old thing today. We got people outside these walls. We got people inside these walls that are doing their best to satisfy the desires that they have. And they desperately need somebody to walk beside them and say, hey, really what you need is you need someone that'll love you better than any person can. You need somebody to lead you in the right direction. And that leading doesn't come from a person. It doesn't come from a pastor. I can point you in the right direction, but I can't make you do anything about that direction. The old saying is, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink. I can take you there, but I can't make you do anything about that. That has to be your personal decision, and that comes from your desire to have something more in your life. And the world needs us to look and stand up and say, there's something better than what the media is trying to push on you. There's something better than what you see through social media, what you hear from your friends. There's something greater than what the world can offer. Right now, we've got people that are just looking and going, hey, we'll follow the shiniest new thing. You show us the prettiest thing, and that's what we're going to follow. You can tell us how Abimelech's bad. Okay, great, Gail, we're going to follow you. Yeah, we agree. At this party, they all agreed, hey, he's awful. Let's overthrow him. I don't know that any of them really understood what they were saying. But in the heat of the moment, like riots happen, in the heat of the moment, they looked and said, hey, they got a good idea. We're going to go with them. They may never make that decision on their own, but they're going to follow somebody else to that decision and make an ignorant choice because it was the popular one in that moment, because somebody stood up and they spoke boldly. And it sounded good. So we followed the best speaker instead of following the Lord. So Gael comes up with this idea. He says, hey, go strengthen the army and tell him to come on out. In verse 30, when Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gael, the son of Ebed, his anger burned. There's one in this crowd that when he heard about all this, he's like, hey, you know what? I don't like this. So verse 31, he sent messengers to Abimelech deceitfully, saying, behold, Gael, the son of Ebed, and his relatives have come to Shechem, and behold, they are stirring up the city against you. Now, therefore, arise by night, you and the people who are with you, and lie in wait in the field. In the morning, as soon as the sun is up, you shall rise early and rush upon the city. And behold, when he and the people who are with him come out against you, you shall do to them whatever you can. I'm going to continue reading through. We'll get through all of the interaction that happens. We'll come back and talk about it. Verse 34 says, so Abimelech and all the people who were with him arose by night and lay in wait against Shechem in 4 different companies. Now Gael, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entrance of the city gate. And Abimelech and the people who were with him arose from the ambush. When Gael saw the people, he said to Zebul, look, people are coming down from the tops of the mountains. But Zebul said to him, you're just seeing the shadow of the mountains as if they were men. Gael spoke again and said, "Behold, people are coming down from the highest part of the land, and one company comes by way of the diviner's oak." Then Zebul said to him, "Where is your boasting now with which you said, 'Who is Abimelech that we should serve him?' Is this not the people whom you despised? Go out now and fight with them." So Gael went out before the leaders of Shechem and fought with Abimelech, and Abimelech chased him, and he fled before him, and many fell wounded up to the entrance of the gate. So Zebul here is a leader in the city, a ruler in the city, most likely a governor there in Shechem. He heard what Gael was saying. He sent messengers to Abimelech and said, "Hey, this is exactly what you need to do." He even gave him instructions on how you could capture this. Here's how we can make light work of all this. Y'all come, you hide in the fields, and when he comes out, he said, you can ambush him, and you can do whatever it is you can, or do to them whatever you can. And so Abimelech is getting word about Gael there, of all the things that he said. And when Gael goes to the entrance of the city that morning, the people start to move. And Zebul is there with him, and Gael's saying, he said, "Looks like there's people coming down the mountains. There's people coming towards us." And Zebul's like, "Oh no, you're just seeing things." Trying to buy a little bit more time, trying to play into that deception that Gael has already used against the people of Shechem. So he's playing into all of that, and he's like, "No, I'm," in verse 37, he says, "No, I really do see people coming from the highest parts of the land, and then there's people over here by the way of the diviner's oak." And so Zebul looks at him, and he calls him out and says, "What happened to that confidence that you had last night? What happened to the confidence of the man who stood up and said, 'Who is Abimelech that you should follow him? Can't we overthrow him?' What happened to your confidence that you had, that you spoke boldly in during that time? Now you told him to gather an army. He's here to fight. You go fight." And so Zebul calls him out. He says, you made all these claims. You incited a riot with the people. And so where's your boldness now? And so he goes out to fight him there in verse 39. Went out before the leaders of Shechem, and he fought with Abimelech, and Abimelech chased him, and he fled away. And many fell wounded up to the entrance of the gate. And so now Abimelech has, the cities in that day were all surrounded by walls. They usually only had one way in, one way out, because it made it easier to protect the city. Well, Abimelech and his people have made it all the way to that entrance gate. And so everybody that's on the inside of the city, they now have no escape because Abimelech has them surrounded, or has the entrance there blocked off. And so it doesn't go well. Gael is forced to fight against Abimelech because of the words that he said. He's got to back up his talk now. And we see the fight begin between the people. Verse 42 says, "Now it came about the next day that the people went out to the field, and it was told to Abimelech. So he took his people and divided them into 3 companies and lay in wait in the field. When he looked and saw the people coming out from the city, he rose against them and slew them. Then Abimelech and the company who was with him dashed forward and stood in the entrance of the city gate, captured it again. The other 2 companies then dashed against all who were in the field and slew them. Abimelech fought against the city all that day, and he captured the city and killed the people who were in it. Then he razed the city and sowed it with salt." So Abimelech here, continuing that fight against the city of Shechem, more people come out. They surround them. One company shuts off the door so they can't go back in, and they slay all the people that are outside the city gates. And then he takes and he says, "You know what? I'm going to make this city utterly useless." And he scatters salt across the entire city so nothing can grow. He kills all vegetation. So this city is now pointless. There were in some of the readings that I did, there are people that talk about the fact that they would do that in a city when they would come and capture it from time to time, and it was almost a curse to them, and it was a reminder of what had happened, the destruction that happened so many years before, because it would take a long time for the ground to recover from that, because you can't just go out and pick up the pieces of salt. It's going to get into the ground, and stuff's just not going to grow in all of that. And so it was a curse on the city and made the ground very infertile and practically useless. And so it was for the people that would have lived through it, and the generations that it would have come after, they would have continued to see that destruction for many, many years. Continues on with the fighting there in verse 46. Says, when all the leaders of the Tower of Shechem heard of it, so all the leaders there, they entered the inner chamber of the temple of El-Berith. Now this temple is the same place that they got the 70 pieces of silver to give to Abimelech so that he could hire the hitman to go and kill his brothers. These are the same leaders that made him king, have now retreated into the temple. And it was told Abimelech that all the leaders of the Tower of Shechem were gathered together. So Abimelech went up to Mount Zalmon, he and all the people who were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a branch from the trees. And he lifted it, laid it on his shoulder, and he said to the people who were with him, what you have seen me do, hurry and do likewise. And so all the people also cut down each one his branch and followed Abimelech and put them on the inner chamber and set the inner chamber on fire over those inside, so that all the men of the Tower of Shechem also died, about 1,000 men and women. Absolute destruction. But if you go back to what Jotham said, they were going to be burned. So that's what Abimelech did. This was Abimelech burning the people of Shechem, the same ones that he was supposed to rule over, the bramble ruling over all the other trees. Well, all those other trees were the people of Shechem, and they were now burned because of the division amongst the people. Abimelech and his people that he had gathered together threw all these branches around, and they lit the city on fire. And everybody that was left in it were destroyed, about 1,000 people. So the curse is beginning to come true. They burned down the tower just as Jotham had foretold in his curse. The same people who gave him the office of king are the same ones that he destroyed. And they were destroyed in the same place that they took the money from to make him king. It's all coming about because they did what they wanted to do. The irony in all of this, they got what they thought they wanted until it was no longer what they wanted, and then they paid dearly for it. It cost them their lives and their whole city. The city is now destroyed, and there's no one left in it. Let's continue on and wrap up Judges chapter 9 for this evening. It says, then Abimelech in verse 50 went to Thebez, and he camped against Thebez and captured it. He looked and said, hey, we've done this in one town of Shechem. We can go over to this other town that's just right down the road, Thebez, and we can do the same thing to them. So now he's gotten greedy. He's had that victory, and he said, I want another one. And so he goes to Thebez, and he's just on an angry rampage here of capturing cities. And so he camped against Thebez, and he captured it. So he surrounded it just like he had done the Tower of Shechem. And verse 51 says, but there was a strong tower in the center of the city, and all the men and women with all the leaders of the city fled there and shut themselves in. They had no way out, so they had to go in tighter in the city. And so they stayed in this tower thinking, hey, if we can keep them out of the tower, we'll be okay. It says they shut themselves in. They went up on the roof of the tower. That's the last part of verse 51. 52 says, so Abimelech came to the tower and fought against it, trying to break into it, and approached the entrance of the tower to burn it with fire. He said, you know what? I'll just take care of this whole tower. I can burn it with fire, and we'll be okay. We'll be good to go there. But a certain woman threw an upper millstone on Abimelech's head, crushing his skull. That's right. It definitely did. So he killed his brothers on a stone. And a lady dropped a millstone, a grinding stone, from the tower on his head. because he was that close. He's trying to break into the tower. They're trying to get to the place where they can capture this tower because that's where all the people are. And apparently a lady is there, and she has something. She said, you know what, I'm going to do everything I can to defend at least my own life. And so she takes this stone and drops it out the window, and it falls on Abimelech's head, and it crushes his skull. Now, he's not completely dead yet, but he is taken out in a very similar fashion to Sisera, the one who was killed by a woman with the tent peg because he thought he could hide in her tent. So he was taken out by a woman, and Abimelech is also taken out by a woman because he wasn't going to last. No matter what, he wasn't going to be able to live through all of this. But then he called quickly in verse 54 to the young man, his armor bearer, and said to him, draw your sword and kill me, so that it will not be said of me, a woman slew me. So the young man pierced him through, and he died. It's one of those, I'd probably just told him, hey, you just need to put me out of my misery. I'm not going to live through this. Go ahead and kill me. But Abimelech's pride said, I'm not going to have it be said that a woman killed me. So he got his armor bearer to thrust his sword into him, and it killed him. And so he died in verse 54. And in verse 55, when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, each departed to his home. They all went back. It was all over. Yeah. It's one of those, he was king. He's not king anymore. We're going home. We're going home. There's nothing left to fight. They didn't want to take Thebez. They didn't want to destroy this tower or this city. They had no desire to do that. They were following the one who was their king. And when the king was dead, they all went home. Thus God repaid the wickedness of Abimelech, which he had done to his father in killing his 70 brothers. Also God returned all the wickedness of the men of Shechem on their heads, and the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal, came upon them. Abimelech got what he wanted, and he became king. And it lasted for 3 years, but it ended in a fight with the same people that put him in power, were the same ones that he destroyed, but then he was destroyed because that's what the curse said. As he was trying to light a fire to this tower, and some commentators may have even said that he may have still been burnt up in that fire as he was crushed. We don't know if the fire was actually started or not, but some believe because of what the curse says that there's a chance that he could have died in a fire there as well. Nonetheless, his life was taken from him, just as the curse had promised it would be. He killed the people of Shechem, and the people of Shechem killed him. His life was taken because he tried to force what it was that he wanted. And for us today, we've made some parallels, some correlations between the people of Shechem and the people that we get the opportunity to minister to. But for us today, the danger is to make sure that we're not doing things to satisfy our own desires. We're doing the things that God calls us to do. We're doing the things that God leads us in. Because if God is in it, it will be successful. If God is a part of it, it will thrive. It will prosper. It will do things that we can't make it do ourselves. That's the difference in following God and following a man. I've told y'all many times, and I will continue to tell you, as long as I'm your pastor, do not follow me. Don't follow me. I will lead you astray. I will make mistakes. And if you follow me, you'll make mistakes with me. Now, I want us to be in agreement. I want us to be a unified body of believers, but we're not following me here. We're not following any of the rest of the staff. What we're doing is we're trying to do our best to equip you to follow God, to do the work that God has called you to do. And the moment that we stop following God is the moment that we don't need to be here anymore. The Israelite people were trying to satisfy their desires with anything they could because they wanted somebody to lead them. They already had the greatest leader of all time. They already had God who was fighting their battles, who was leading them where they needed to go. He was doing all of these things for them. They said, no, but we need somebody in front of us. We want a king. So they gave themselves a king. And the ones who put him in place were the ones who lost their lives. And that king's life was taken from himself as well, because that's not what God desired. We can do a lot of things, and it may last for a few years like Abimelech's reign will. But if it's not what God desires, it will never bear the fruit that God desires for it to. It will never become what it is that he wants it to be. So we got to follow him so that we can point other people to him. Because I think that's our ultimate desire, is to point people to the gospel. For lives to be changed, people to be saved, the lost to be saved, and those that are saved to be growing in their faith. That's what we want to see happen. That only happens when we follow God, not when we follow somebody that we want to put in leadership. Let's turn our attention to prayer and praises and give us the opportunity to thank the Lord for some of the things that he is doing, and also lift up some prayers as well. I got my cheat sheet now. All right, over the past few weeks, we've tried to update with the various things that we've had from Realm and just different updates that we have gotten from folks. I will say this, it was wonderful, our 4th of July celebration that we had last Wednesday. If you missed it, it started off a little bit warm outside, but it turned out to be a wonderful evening. The community was here. There were folks that I got to meet. Some of them are new to the area, moved here in the last couple of months. Some of them were faces that were familiar with other people of Highland, but there was a lot of folks here, and it was a great time of fellowship. It was really, really good. So we definitely want to thank all those that had a hand in putting all of that on, but also just our community showing up and us getting to provide something fun fellowship for them. And the cops didn't come, so that's always good. When you can shoot off fireworks and the cops don't show up, that's a great day. So it was really, really good. So thank y'all for praying for it. And if you were able to be here to participate, thank you for being here as well. I know the Joy Group had a wonderful lunch that they got to have this past week in celebration with and the I can't even remember their name now. The Southern Revival Band. That's what it is. Southern Revival Band. They did a wonderful job of playing, and so it was a good time of fellowship there, and so that was great. Miss Joyce went back to the doctor today. Good report.
Fantastic.
Awesome. No more surgeries needed there. So awesome. Awesome. That's what we like to hear. God is taking care of that knee, and that's we praise the Lord for that. Definitely. I did talk to Miss Ann. She said Frank came through his surgery well. That was the last report that I had gotten. She said he is going to be in the hospital for several days. Till Monday. That's what I thought it was. So, yeah, she said he was out of surgery. Everything went fine. She said he'll go home on Monday. And so y'all continue to pray for him and his recovery. Pray for her as well. I think she may be traveling back and forth. I know she said she wasn't going to be staying overnight every night. So y'all pray for Miss Ann, but also pray for Brother Frank as he continues to recover from his surgery there. I know they would appreciate that. Keep praying for John Chance. He is a member at Dogwood Park, but we keep hearing God working miracles through all of that. He had an accident, a work-related accident, and cut his hand very, very, very badly. And they thought that he was going to lose his hand, but through it all, they weren't able to get him to the places that they thought that he needed to be. But the specialists were able to come in, and God is continuing to work miracles through that. The last report that I heard from Brother Phil, or that I'd seen from him, was that there's some movement and stuff in the fingers, which is incredible from where the journey started. So y'all keep praying for John Chance and that family there as he continues to heal. And we're praying that God would allow him to get all mobility back in his hand there, and everything would work wonderfully. God's already working in that. So y'all keep praying for that, but we do want to praise the Lord for that. You may have gotten the alert yesterday for a little boy named Daryl Beck here in the Molino area, just off of Barrow Park Road. A 4-year-old little boy had gotten out of the house, and they later found his body in one of the ponds around the house. So